fellow Vincentians, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Over the past 2 or so weeks, the global pandemic of coronavirus, or COVID-19, as the World Health Organization, WHO, has dubbed it, has been galloping in its spread in our major diaspora centers and tourism source markets of the USA, the United Kingdom, and Europe, having hitherto raged among the populations in influential economic hubs such as China, Japan, South Korea, and Iran. Given their interconnectedness, that is to say, the interconnectedness of the world's peoples through transportation, migration, global communications, and trade, the contagion of COVID-19 has either engulfed or touched physically almost every country on earth. In the Caribbean, all but one of the CARICOM member countries have reported at least one person who has tested positive for COVID-19. In some regional states, the spread of the virus has been wider and more challenging than in others. In a smaller number of Caribbean countries, there have been 1 or 2 connected deaths. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there has been only 1 case of a positive test for COVID-19 on March the 11th, an imported case from the United Kingdom. Thankfully, there has been no other positive case since then. Even though we have tested 28 persons thus far, either persons with symptoms of the virus or relevant persons of interest. We are awaiting results, I've been advised, from 5 more tests which were sent earlier today. And praises be to God, we have had no deaths, we have had no serious illness arising from COVID-19 in our country. There has been no local transmission, no community transmission of the coronavirus. But our country cannot be, must not be, and has not been complacent in our response. Our government's approach has been to follow the science, act prudently on the medical advice of the professionals in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, be guided by the sage advice of the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, and the Caribbean Public Health Agency. Distill the practical observations from the experiences of other countries worldwide and shape responses appropriate to our circumstances, and ramp up in either an incremental or accelerated manner our policies and practical measures to fit the fluidity or altering nature of the global, regional, and national condition in all their interconnectedness. The central fact is that COVID-19 is a serious disease to be addressed seriously and scientifically, not complacently, but also not hysterically. Proportionate responses are demanded always with urgency, and the changing level of risks is required to be managed sensibly and cautiously, avoiding both overreaction and underreaction. It is a balance not always easily achieved. The received scientific learning and wisdom of the nature of COVID-19 is that it is not a death sentence like HIV, AIDS, in an earlier period, or more recently, Ebola. Some 80% of those who are infected by COVID-19 will have a mild infection and recover well and in good time. Only a very small percentage of those who are actually infected will suffer significantly, and an even smaller percentage of persons, particularly with severe pre-existing conditions, such as respiratory and heart ailments, diabetes, and hypertension, will succumb fatally to the virus. The responsive health initiatives have thus been taken with all these factual matrices in mind. We recognize that some may die from it, others may die with it. It is a serious threat to life, living, and production. We acknowledge too that the human fear of COVID-19 may be far greater than the actual effect of the disease itself. This fear has taken the scourge of coronavirus into some uncharted waters and has scarred the consciousness of much of the public in our country. The real threat of the coronavirus and the fear, the sometimes hysterical fear of it, has wrought a composite, monumental challenge to all of us. This monumental challenge of the coronavirus and its consequences has four interrelated, intersecting dimensions: health, economic, social, and security. These four dimensions crisscross each other in the global, regional, and national arenas, and they interconnect across countries. The interrelatedness and crisscrossing of all these dimensions affects St. Vincent and the Grenadines directly, without recourse to any particular action on our part. For example, the closing of the borders of some countries with which St. Vincent and the Grenadines meaningfully interfaces, the curtailment of travel from some countries, and the decisions of cruise lines and airlines to suspend operations have resulted in massive declines of our returning migrants, in tourism arrivals, the closure of hotels, and the laying off of workers. So in keeping with the fluidity, unevenness, and evolving circumstances of the interconnectedness and many-sided impacts of COVID-19, the up-to-date containment and management framework for COVID-19 in our country involves the following. 1. All persons who arrive from China, Italy, Iran, South Korea, USA, United Kingdom, and other member countries of the European Union, including the overseas departments of France and Canada, will be quarantined automatically at their own expense for 14 days. 2. Any person arriving from the same named countries or any other country with symptoms of COVID-19 will be isolated privately or in a public facility and tested. Relevant medical protocols will further apply depending on the outcome of the test, but in any event, the isolation would be for at least 14 days. 3. All educational institutions, preschools, early childhood centers, primary, secondary, post-secondary, and tertiary, have been closed for 1 week. That announcement was made already, prior to the Easter vacation, and continuing until the start of the third school term. 4. An advisory was issued for the cancellation of the Easter in Union Island and the Easter Regatta in Bequia. The organizers of Gospel Fest have postponed the holding of this festival from April to an unspecified date in the future. 5. Although all airports and seaports of entry remain open except Chateaubriand, which is closed temporarily, there is much enhanced border control and surveillance of persons with symptoms of COVID-19 and other persons of health interest. The immigration officers and the health personnel at the airports and ports of entry work closely with each other on this matter. 6. An advisory has been issued for places of entertainment, social gathering, worship, or locales for funerals, weddings, birthdays, or social parties to restrict the number of persons attending to a reasonable size, and to follow protocols of personal or social distancing as are reasonably practicable in all the circumstances. 7, an altered regime for the granting of sick leave for employees with flu-like symptoms or respiratory problems or COVID-19 infections has been established for central government employees. This regime is advisory for state-owned enterprises and the private sector. Employers are being asked, as far as is reasonably practicable, to organize their workplaces, shift systems, and home work regimes to better face the threat of COVID-19. 8, the array of oft-repeated personal hygiene protocols are advised to be scrupulously followed by individuals, families at homes, and workplaces. 9, an isolation unit is currently being set up and is scheduled for opening by mid-April 2020. 10, a flu clinic on St. Vincent and temporary isolation facilities, the retrofitted containers, in the Grenadine Islands of Beckwith, Canouan, Union Island, Mairo, and at Kingstown have been put in place. Quarantine isolation rooms have been identified on these Grenadine Islands, plus Mustique and on St. Vincent. 11, the equipment, materials, and supplies for testing COVID-19 have been ordered and are due to arrive in St. Vincent and the Grenadines shortly. Other materials and supplies to combat COVID-19 have also been ordered and are also due to arrive soonest. Until in-country testing becomes available, testing is being done at CAFA, at the CAFA labs in Trinidad or in Barbados, courtesy of that country's government. 12, a hotline for COVID-19 has been set up. 13, some 40 Vincentian nurses and intern doctors have been or are being hired to strengthen the containment and surveillance at the hospitals and clinics, the ports of entry, hotels, and the hotline in respect of COVID-19. 14, 12 nurses and 4 doctors from Cuba, a gift from the government and people of Cuba, are due to arrive in St. Vincent and the Grenadines tomorrow for an initial 3-month period, but which time period may be extended to assist us in containing and managing COVID-19. 15, the government has purchased the antiviral drug interferon from Cuba in sufficient doses to satisfy the treatment cycles for 50 patients. The OECS Pharmaceutical Procurement Service has also ordered additional supplies of this drug for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The dosages of interferon will arrive in a few days' time. The OECS has ordered more for us at our request. 16, overall, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has taken several other practical measures in its normal and enhanced operations to fortify our battle against COVID-19, especially as regards elderly persons, pregnant women, and other at-risk group. I would like very much to thank the professionals in the Ministry of Health who have been addressing this dreaded disease. I want to thank especially the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Simone Keyser-Beach, and the Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Roger Duncan. In their leadership, they have been heroic in this matter. The global economy has been put into a debilitating tailspin because of COVID-19. The regional economy is ravaged. Our national economy has been undermined by COVID-19, an exogenous shock of unprecedented proportions. Assessments of the global, regional, and national economies are at various levels of severe downturns. The travel and tourism sector has been dealt a devastating blow. Airplanes are not flying. Cruise ships are not sailing. Yachting arrivals are at a trickle. Airports are bereft of travelers. Employees are being laid off and their incomes are falling. Trade in goods and services are in a slump everywhere. Remittances are dwindling. Investments are slowing or shut down. Revenues of governments are falling sharply. External supports for developing countries, inclusive of small island states, are limited. A difficult and extremely challenging period lies ahead for the island economies of the Caribbean, including St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In our country, an appropriate recovery plan is being put in place and is being acted upon urgently. This plan contains strategic and targeted measures for economic support and recovery. This plan provides help for the helpless, support for the disadvantaged, and for those who face urgent though temporary difficulties. Overall, this economic recovery plan is designed to lift up our people, our nation. It will enable us to rise stronger from the feverish ashes of COVID-19. Every single one of us in our small country has an uplifting role to play. Each of us has to put his or her mind, heart, and hands to it. Together, we are at war against the COVID-19 disease, and we are enjoined as one to meet unflinchingly the challenges connected thereto. The Cabinet and senior public servants have been engaged in consultations with stakeholders in tourism, banking, credit unions, industry, trade, commerce, and the trade unions on the core elements of an economic recovery and stimulus package. Our government will shortly be taking this package to Parliament in the form of supplementary estimates and supplementary appropriation bill. The total package of fiscal stimulus and tax relief will amount to more than 70 million EC dollars, or in excess of 3% of gross domestic product, GDP, a significant stimulus in all the circumstances. Tomorrow morning, I shall brief the members of the opposition on the details of this economic recovery and stimulus package. The bulk of the revenue for this package is targeted to come from 6 main sources: the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the Contingency Fund of the Government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the United Arab Emirates, the Bank of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, other financial institutions, and bondholders. The monies from these sources are either in hand or at hand. Support will come from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the National Insurance Services, the St. Vincent and Grenadines Port Authority, the Agricultural Input Warehouse, and the Eastern Caribbean Group of Companies. Additionally, the locally based financial institutions, the commercial banks, the credit unions, and other lending institutions, the Irish Industry Association, the Central Water and Sewage Authority, the St. Vincent and Grenadines Electricity Services, VINLEC, the telecoms companies, the private sector, the workers and their trade unions, the farmers and fisherfolk, all state employees, and all Vincentians are expected to play significant roles in our economic recovery. We are hopeful, too, that our international friends and allies will assist us in one way or another as we expand and consolidate our socio-economic recovery in the post-COVID-19 period. The expenditure of the revenue garnered for the economic recovery and stimulus plan will focus on the following main items. 1, COVID-19 health initiatives, such as construction of the isolation unit and associated facilities, equipment, supplies, materials, drugs, hiring of additional nurses and medical interns, accommodation, food and transportation, and associated expenses for the 12 Cuban nurses and 4 doctors who are specialists in handling infectious diseases. For these COVID-19 health initiatives, the allocation in the plan is $10 million. 2, immediate generation of jobs in public works programs, specifically funded road and building programs and other physical facilities. The second phase of PAVE, painting of some government buildings. We have to spruce up the place. We have to feel good. And we have to lift our spirits in every single way. This program of immediate job creation through public works, the allocation in this plan is $30 million. 3, direct supports in the areas of farming, animal husbandry, fishing, additional monies for the Farmers Support Company, free seeds for the farmers at the Agricultural Input Warehouse, subsidized inputs, provisions for fishing boats. We are going to buy fishing boats, and we are going to provide them to the fisher folk throughout St. Vincent and the Grenadines, maybe 25 of them. We are thinking about 27-foot long fiberglass boats with 75 horsepower engines. And we are also going to buy farm animals for all different descriptions, and we are going to provide them to the farmers on generous terms. The allocation for direct supports in the areas of farming, animal husbandry, and fishing is $9 million. 4, support for the arrowroot industry. In the north of this country, the northeast, this is an important industry. $3 million. 5, social supports for vulnerable and affected persons. We'll be widening the social safety net with an interim assistance benefit program for persons not on public assistance nor in receipt of a pension. And they will get this interim assistance benefit until December the 31st, 2020. We'll be providing supports for displaced workers in the hotel and tourism sector, including cruise buses and taxis, through what we call a displacement supplementary income for 3 months in the first instance. We'll be hiring an additional 20 home helpers for the elderly because they are a challenged group, and additional transport support for students, including from the Grenadines. The sum allocated to social supports for vulnerable and affected persons, $5 million. 6, additional resources for grants under the promotion of youth micro enterprises program, the PRIME. In the budget already we have $2 million. We are putting an additional $1 million. These would be young entrepreneurs starting out, persons under the age of 40. 7, additional supports for small businesses, including in the field of culture and the arts. There are a number of individuals who perform at hotels and the like who are out of a job. And they also have to be supported, including small businesses. And these would be for persons over the age of 40. There's provision in PRIME for those under 40. And the allocation for the additional support for small businesses, $2 million. 8, I've given instructions for the purchase of a Medivac vessel. We'll make a down payment of $700,000. The vessel will cost in excess of $4 million. We'll purchase it from the Damen shipyard in Holland, and I've already given the instructions to effect that purchase. Delivery should be in about 3 months' time. 9, additional supports for the Tourism Authority, because when we get out of this difficult and challenging period, we need additional monies for the Tourism Authority, $1 million, in addition to their existing budget of $14 million. 10, additional supports for Argyle International Airport for 4 to 5 months, about $2 million. And 11, communication expenses. We have to make sure that all what we are doing is properly communicated. And we have a small sum of $350,000 in the plan. The aggregate of this expenditure amounts to $64.05 million. Additional, and this is real money, as I have said, it's either in hand already or at hand. Additional to this sum, we are having tax relief and other measures which are estimated to cost the revenue approximately $10 million. In total, therefore, the fiscal stimulus amounts to $74.05 million, or 3.4% of GDP. The details of these additional items of tax relief and supportive measures which cost the revenue in totality $10 million, they're as follows. 1. We'll be purchasing 500,000 pounds of arrowroot starch from the Arrowroot Industry Association at the price of $3 per pound, below the going price. That's $1.5 million, and we'll provide to the school feeding programs, the hospitals, the prisons, and others. I expect the nutritionists in the ministries of health and education to provide creative recipes and advice on the use of this healthy product. 2. A regime for duty-free barrels will be instituted earlier. Christmas will come from May. From May the 1st to August the 31st, a regime for duty-free Christmas barrels would be put in place. We may extend it, but that is the first period. Our diaspora is likely to be helpful to their families at home in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in this traditional manner, especially in respect of items required at the time of COVID and at the start of the academic year, which begins in September 2020. 3. There will be a waiver of duty and VAT on the following items, including electricity for domestic, hotel, and guest house consumers for the period from March the 20th, 2020 to July the 30th, 2020 in the first instance. And the items, in addition to electricity, which we will be waiving the duty and the VAT, they're as follows: bleach, disinfectants, liquid hand soap, hand sanitizers, rubbing alcohol, oral rehydrating salts, acetaminophen, hydrogen peroxide, glycerin, soap dispensers, bath soap, toilet paper, paper towels. All of this will result in a estimated revenue loss of some $3.8 million. There will be, a removal of the $2 license fee per box of bananas exported. As you know, we export to the region, and the traffickers pay $2 per box as an export fee. We're removing that. In fact, we removed it from last week, even though we haven't gone to Parliament yet. We did that administratively. The annual cost of this is $140,000. 4. Relief is to be granted to airlines, including Liat and our local carriers, which operate in or out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in respect of certain taxes, fees, and airport charges. 5. The socio-economic recovery and stimulus package is being lodged within the framework of the public policies of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the OECS, and CARICOM. In this regard, from May 1st, 2020, the departure tax for all holders of CARICOM passports will be reduced from $40 US to $20 US to facilitate intra-regional travel. We have to put the things in place to pick up. Further, the following policy initiatives touching and concerning the socio-economic recovery are being advanced. 1. The banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions have agreed to provide a 6-month moratorium on the payment of principal and interest on home mortgages, business loans, personal and consumer loans, and credit cards. I want to repeat that. The banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions have agreed to provide a 6-month moratorium on the payment of principal and interest on home mortgages, business loans, personal and consumer loans, and credit cards. All these financial institutions will further arrange specific customized packages of financing or refinancing for their customers. 2. VINLEC and CWSA have agreed not, emphasize not, to disconnect any customer who is currently not in arrears for more than 2 months, not to disconnect them for a period of 3 months, starting from now. Any indebtedness on those bills after this 3-month moratorium period will be paid on an agreed incremental basis over a period up to 2 years. Any customer who has been in arrears and who is currently disconnected will not, emphasize not, be required to pay the reconnection fee either to VINLEC or CWSA if the reconnection is effected within the next 3 months from today. 3. The telecommunications companies are being asked to provide appropriate relief for hotels and business consumers on the delivery of a range of telecom services. 4. Special subsidies on animal feeds are asked to be provided by the Eastern Caribbean group of companies for a targeted number of farmers producing poultry, sheep, goats, and cattle. 5. The National Insurance Services will provide a prepayment of 2 months pension benefits for all categories of pensioners, contributory and non-contributory, so as to facilitate upfront costs of pensioners at this time. There are 7,406 contributory pensioners at the NIS and 783 non-contributory pensioners. The NIS will also provide $1.25 million in the form of temporary unemployment relief across economic sectors for active employee registrants. So the government will provide a displacement supplemental income for persons who have been laid off or who have lost income, 1 week off, 1 week on in the hotel sector and tourism sector. And they will be given this supplemental income. The NIS will provide unemployment benefit to the tune of $1.25 million across the board, across the sectors, but you can't double dip. You can't get the displacement supplementary income and dip into the NIS and vice versa. 6. The St. Vincent and Grenadines Port Authority will engage the business community in respect of granting a measure of relief in respect of certain port charges with effect from April 2020 for a 3-month period in the first instance. It is expected that any such relief would be passed on to the ultimate consumer. 7. Price controls will be established on all items on which relief on duties and VAT are granted. Price gouging is being discouraged. 8. The Department of Inland Revenue has decided to provide certain extensions of deadlines for citizens to file their personal income tax returns, for payment of motor vehicle licenses in respect of vehicles ending with the last digit 3, and for the payment of persons paying second half year licenses for motor vehicles with last digit 9, and for the payment of second quarter 2020 liquor license fees. These deadlines range from between 3 to 4 weeks. The department will inform the public of these details accordingly. 9. I'm pleased to report that the workers and their unions, who this morning gave full support to this economic recovery and stimulus package. I'm pleased to report also that they have agreed to refrain from making demands for increases in wages, salaries, or related benefits for a one-year period in the first instance, save and except in a few cases of current negotiations between unions and certain private sector entities. The unions have also agreed to an extension of the layoff period in Section 27(1) of the Protection of Employment Act up to December the 31st, 2020, an amendment with a sunset provision. Under that law, if you're laid off for 6 weeks, you can go and ask for your severance pay because you're taken as being constructively dismissed. But in the circumstances, the workers have agreed that we could extend it by a further 2 weeks. But to the end of, for the period ending December the 31st, 2020. And from January the 1st, you revert back to the 6 weeks. That's why I say it has a sunset provision. This proposed socioeconomic recovery and stimulus package is additional to existing initiatives and is specific to this time of COVID. Clearly, the existing estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2020 and the corresponding appropriation bill, which were approved in January this year, will require careful recalibration in the implementation of both the revenue and expenditure estimates, recurrent and capital. You may remember that the capital estimates for 2020 were set at $310 million. It is self-evident that the projected revenues in the 2020 budget, which we passed in January, will decline substantially. The full extent of that decline and over which time period are not yet calculable, given the range of uncertainties. So there has to be a reprioritization of expenditure to meet the unfolding realities globally, regionally, and nationally. This exercise is ongoing. Over the medium term, our fiscal condition, will be consolidated as the anticipated economic recovery takes root. I'm encouraged that both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund issued jointly today a call for debt relief for either countries, International Development Association countries who can borrow at low rates of interest from the World Bank, that a plan is put forward, a call is put forward for debt relief for countries like St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The overall stimulus and socioeconomic recovery package is significant. As the global economy recovers, the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the rest of the region must be in a position to lift off and expand. Still, we are mindful that even before the expiration of the threat of COVID-19 and its hubris, the 2020 hurricane season would be upon us. This makes the overall situation even more challenging, awash with downside risks. Our region's premier financial institution, the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, is currently preparing a package of financial support for its member countries. I await expectantly the CDB's offered package. In this regard, regional provision has to be made for LIAT, so vital for our region's progress. On these matters, I have already been in preliminary conversation with the distinguished president of the Caribbean Development Bank. Fellow Vincentians, with our primary and secondary school students on their Easter holidays, at this challenging time, the Ministries of Education, Health, Sports, and Social Development are paying a special attention to these students' health, learning, and happiness. We have to be focused at this time. In addition to everything else what we are doing, we must be focused on the health, the learning, and the happiness of our children and young people. The Ministry of Education, in concert with teachers and in partnership with Digicel, are delivering online revision classes to students who are preparing for their CXC examinations this year. Further, in light of the disruptions caused by COVID-19, our Ministry of Education is advocating an option for the CXC examinations to be postponed to July. Similarly, the Ministry of Education is actively pursuing plans to deliver revision classes on an online platform for the CPEA, which is also a regional examination conducted by CXC. Consideration for postponement of the CPEA exams is also being pursued. The Ministry of Health and Sports are promoting healthy recreational exercises for our students who are on holidays, but in a manner which respects the requisite for personal or social distancing. These recreational exercises include walks and hikes in spaces which are not much populated, and there are many of them across our country. The Ministry of Health is advising the children and young persons to restrict or avoid, if practicable, contact with the elderly persons, grandparents, and the like, especially those who have an ailment or not so healthy physical condition. The Ministry of Social Development, through its outreach initiatives, is paying a special close attention to the social condition of children and their families at this time of COVID-19, with a view to strengthening the social safety net. The social support elements in the socio-economic and stimulus package will undoubtedly assist in this regard. Most importantly, the individual families, the communities, the churches, social organizations, and the media can be creative in helping to build further a climate for our children and young persons' health, safety, learning, and happiness. Remember, we are all in this together. Fellow Vincentians, social and economic dislocation invariably presents opportunities for certain persons with selfish or lawless disposition, a small minority, to disrupt or undermine the peaceful enjoyment of the lives, living, and property of the vast majority of people. The Royal St. Vincent Grenadines Police Force and the security apparatus of the state are alive to this matter and have been activating plans to strengthen further citizen security. Tried and tested modes of policing, including community policing, are being emphasized. And shortly, more police boots will be on the ground with the release from training of over 100 police recruits. Video surveillance is being increased, and so too intelligence gathering. In this period, a special attention is being paid to crimes against property, including pre-deal larceny. In respect of prisons, visit restrictions have been put in place for family members of prisoners and others. The police force, the Coast Guard, the Immigration, Customs, and Port authorities are coordinating their work to ensure that our border security is enhanced. Our interface with the regional security system, the implementation agency for CARICOM states impacts, and our external security partners are quite helpful in this regard. I am keeping under constant review our security situation, especially at this time. Any immediate, significant threat, additionally, to our citizen security would be met with further appropriate actions. I give that solemn assurance. Indeed, our government has already been firm on those who break a voluntary quarantine. Whenever a person acts irresponsibly in this regard, he or she is taken to the lockouts and compulsorily quarantined with a specific legal sanction and under the security of the police. Indeed, 4 such quarantine orders were sought of and obtained from the lockouts today. And this is not the first time, at this time of COVID, that the legal powers of the state have been so exercised. If you are quarantined, I want you to listen to me. You stay in quarantine. This is a serious matter. And if you do not stay in quarantine, if you are voluntarily quarantined, voluntary quarantine doesn't mean you can walk in and walk out. It is an option which is given to you in certain circumstances. But you have to stay there. If you leave it, we will take you to the law courts and we will have a compulsory order issued. I don't want to ask people to be snooping about individuals who break the quarantine, but I want you to inform the police or the health authorities, anybody who has so broken the quarantine, so that we can address the matter. I know that in several countries in our Caribbean, there have been total shutdowns, partial shutdowns, a declaration of an entire country as a disaster area, and declarations of states of emergency. Some other Caribbean countries have adopted a broad approach of incremental measures for lower risks and accelerated measures for more heightened risks, as we have done in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in accordance with all the circumstances. However, make no mistake, if in any altered condition of this shifting maze of COVID-19, that it is deemed necessary and desirable to adopt the most extreme measures legally permissible, my government will act accordingly. This brings me to the issue of public transportation on minibuses. I am strongly advising, and I want my friends in the Minibus Association and minibus operators to hear what I'm saying. I'm not just advising. I am strongly advising minibus operators to be very sensitive to the matter of overcrowding on these buses and cease it forthwith. Let's have some responsibility in that regard. Further, these minibuses must be sanitized and cleaned on an ongoing basis to militate against the possibility of spreading the virus. You have to clean the seats, you have to wipe them down, to wipe off the handle, you have to keep the place clean. You may say, well, the Prime Minister is talking about what can he do. There are things we can do and you wouldn't be on the road. I don't want to do that. I want us to cooperate with one another. This is an open, free and democratic society. I want us to build consensus among all these things because I don't want a heavy hand. I want us all to be responsible and we work sensibly in going forward. That is the best way. Passengers must also act sensibly to protect themselves, given the requisite of personal or social distancing and the practice of good hygiene in the fight against COVID-19. As I conclude this address, I reiterate that an interconnected monumental challenge faces us with its health, economic, social, and security elements or dimensions. I have outlined the measures which our government has taken thus far and those which we propose to take, including the socio-economic recovery and stimulus package. Throughout this difficult, testing, and complex time of COVID-19, I have sought to remain calm, resolute, and focused in providing leadership without succumbing to panic, hysteria, and futile histrionics. But to mix my metaphors, we are not out of the woods as yet. There are going to be some very rocky roads to travel. We are going to have some very tough days in all the changing scenes of life driven by COVID-19 and more. Some of our best laid plans may have to be revised and altered by choice or by circumstances. But through it all, I am confident that we as a nation shall triumph over all the pain and suffering, the hardships and challenges, the fears, with God's help and our combined efforts. I am mindful that as I speak to you this evening, many of you are hurting from your current condition. I'm mindful of that, and I feel it. You're anxious about your future and that of your children and families. Fearful of the dreaded COVID-19 and worried whether or not we as a nation or individually, whether we are managing well the composite tasks touching upon health, the economic, the social, and our security. Your hurt, your anxiety, your fear, and your worry are understandable. But we must be calm, focused, and confident in our unity and solidarity. And with God's amazing grace, we will not be defeated individually or collectively. I acknowledge that many of our people across our land and seas ponder on the age-old question: why do bad things happen to good people? And we are a good people. This is the central query of the indomitable Job, who lost so much, but who, after personal disaster, persevered, prospered abundantly again, and was redeemed gloriously. COVID-19 has come upon us at a time when many of us, or our loved ones, are experiencing already a debilitating or potentially debilitating disease. I know many of you to whom I am speaking go about daily with that feeling that you or your loved one have a debilitating disease, or potentially one. And then COVID comes. We must not lose hope or faith. That which is debilitating or potentially so, plus COVID-19, must not be allowed to induce in us a sense of agitated helplessness. These challenges must be met with a patience and a calm, knowing that sun brightens stone, that our Redeemer lives, and that we are especially resourceful at the very time of looming danger, be it individual, familial, or national. When the dust of COVID-19, its consequences, and its aftermath are settled, in our looking back, it is my hope that we will honestly conclude that the best in us came out. I know that in the complexities of life and living, out of some will come the worst, but out of many, out of most, will come the best. I feel sure that our collective best will emerge, and we will rise stronger from the feverish ashes of COVID-19, stronger than ever, to strive, to seek, to find, but never to yield. Morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we need, thy hand has provided. Great is your faithfulness. Thank you. Good night. And may Almighty God continue to bless us all.
You've been listening to a live address by Prime Minister Dr. the Honourable Ralphie Gonsalves from the Foreign Affairs Conference Room. This evening's event began approximately 8 o'clock and was carried across all platforms of radio stations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, originating from the National Broadcasting Corporation. We wish to thank all those involved in making this a reality. In addition of video support to Terence Davis, who
so that we can address the matter. I know that in several countries in our Caribbean, there have been total shutdowns, partial shutdowns, a declaration of an entire country as a disaster area, and declarations of states of emergency. Some other Caribbean countries